Welcome back to Emotional Runway, the entrepreneur's guide to mental health. In today's episode, Krista and I talk about work-life balance and how little most of us entrepreneurs actually have. Our guest today is David Stidger, the founder of Open Door, where they work with people on the spectrum to help them develop work skills. I hope you enjoy. Hey, Krista, how's it going?
I'm doing well.
Today we're talking about work-life balance, and I think we have a little bit of a work-life balance issue today, which is that my son Brendan is here in the studio with us today because we are both I'm working and lifing this morning.
Working and lifing.
Yeah, never a dull moment with him around. He's 8 years old, and we'll definitely have him as a guest on the podcast here soon, so he can tell you what little work-life balance I actually have. But we are excited today to have David Stidger, who's the founder and CEO of Open Door, and we'll have him joining us here a little bit later in the show. But before we get to David, all joking aside, let's talk about work-life balance, because I definitely think that's one of the bigger issues that we face as entrepreneurs, and trying to figure out how to actually get all of this done while helping with the family. And, I think a lot of us are working from home now too, not just us entrepreneurs. So what are you seeing in the community with regards to work-life balance?
Well, there really is. It's across the spectrum. I don't know that there's anyone that I have personally worked with or myself that do this really well. I think it's an ongoing effort to balance, the demands of our careers, as well as family demands, and just also the demands of taking care of ourselves. So it's not a perfect formula, and it's really figuring out what works for you. And that is actually how I came to know David Stidger. And if he wants to share a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's talk about it. So David's right here. So chime on in, David. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was, so our office where Open Door is located in the medical district. So there's a lot of service providers around there and counselors and things of that nature. So actually a guy I used to work with is a counselor pretty much basically next door to us. And he had seen some of our clients in a counseling capacity and this and that. And I reached out to him and I said, man, do you know of anybody that does just would be a good counselor for just a guy that's an entrepreneur, feels kind of overworked, et cetera. So he was like, yeah, there's this girl, Krista, who you should reach out to. And I was like, all right, done. So, full transparency, I called her. She actually was really easy to talk to on the phone. I felt like we almost had a session like the first time I talked to you.
That's like every time we do this podcast, I feel like I have a session.
So it, that's how we met, and now we've gotten into kind of capacity of collaborating together and in the community and doing things with different sides of mental health, and it's been really beneficial.
So let's backtrack. So
Sure.
You are the founder and CEO of Open Door.
Mm-hmm. I've never been called a CEO before.
Well, there's a first, right? Somebody's got to be the CEO. But Open Door works with neurodiverse clients and helping them get prepared for the job market.
Correct.
So you were in the mental health field yourself.
Correct.
And you realized that as an entrepreneur in the mental health field, you're kind of straddling both of those things. And so you needed some help as well, too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So tell me about what that was like, because I think I could be wrong. I'm not a mental health professional, but
Sure.
It seems to me like every doctor I know doesn't want to go to the doctor. So how did you realize that it was time for you to go get some assistance as well?
I think people notice, your close-knit people around you notice when you are seeming a little more stressed, maybe a little shorter fuse, maybe XYZ. But I just kind of had the feeling that I was dragging. And I don't like to drag, so I know when that's noticeable. What I don't know is what exactly it is that's making me feel that way, or how to go about it. So that's kind of the point that I was like, just talk to somebody. And I think just realizing, which I think this particular podcast is so beneficial, is you're not by yourself. There's other people out there that are running a small business or a large corporation or whatever it may be, and they've got all of this on their shoulders. And that, I think, is step number one, is realizing you're not doing it completely solo. So
yeah, no, I think that's super important. And I mean, this is kind of what started this conversation with you and I, Krista, probably similar to the conversation you guys had, which
Sure.
was, you feel alone, you're running a business, and that feels lonely. And you're also hyper aware of your mental health because you're in the mental health field. Yeah. So, I mean, this is something that, I'd love to ask you about, Krista, is, how do you, because you're also a founder too. We haven't talked about that a lot yet on the podcast, and we definitely will. But how are you striking that balance between helping yourself mentally, helping your clients mentally, and also running a business and trying to keep sane doing all that?
Some days better than others.
Yeah.
For me, what's been super critical is to check in with myself. So, for example, on my way in this morning, Matt, and David, I've had a sick kid at home. That puts an additional responsibility on me to do my work and be able to also be a mom. And I am a single mom, so juggling that is figuring out, just as David mentioned, like, at what point am I seeing myself slip? So knowing those signs for myself, which is I typically do find it really important to little things, walk my kids to school in the morning. So that is kind of a checkpoint for me to see, is everything kind of right side up in my life. Well, I couldn't do that this morning, and that really affected me. And that's a small thing, but for me, knowing that is kind of my process or practice as a check-in for myself to see if life's upside down. And it kind of was. So I have to shift. I have to readjust kind of what I'm doing. And that's by just taking this pause of like, where am I at right now? How am I feeling? What kind of energy am I putting out there? What do I need to help myself at this point? Because as someone who owns a business, someone who provides a lot of care to others, and also I'm a mom, right? I have a family that, I provide for. So if I'm showing up and I feel pretty crappy, then everyone feels pretty crappy. So it's a check-in. That's the awareness part, and it's critical.
So, I mean, taking that back one step too, I think it sounds to me like, and I know this to be the case for myself, but it sounds to me like having a set routine is a good way to avoid the chaos to begin with.
Yes.
And then checking in on that routine to see how you're doing.
Yes. So, and I will tell you one thing that has been critical in setting routine for myself is to be able to get up in the morning. The first thing I do is meditate, guided meditation, 5 minutes. I do about 5 to 10 minutes of journaling, and then I start moving, which is another important part of dealing with stress and just the demands of our work and our life, by taking a walk.
Yeah. And I know that, I mean, just from my own experience, when I was really struggling, getting out and walking was like key. And I noticed that I would get up in the morning and I would feel stressed. And like, even if I didn't want to do it, as long as I got out and walked, as I was walking, I was almost like pounding the stress out while I was hitting the pavement. Now, of course, it was like 22 degrees this morning, so it's becoming really challenging. I got to find a different activity.
yes.
Bundle up.
But I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, is like sticking with a routine. As much as some of us resist routines at all costs, I'm guilty of that. I think is really critical. What I've noticed just over the last couple of days, because we're talking about work-life balance, and kids are everywhere, and school got canceled the other day for something, and it was just like, I can't think straight because my whole world is upside down. And so it's not like drop kids off at school, go get breakfast, sit down, do work for a couple of hours, pick kids up from school. It like when you get out of that routine, I think is when you're setting yourself up for trouble.
And
Sorry.
No, either one of you. Yeah, David, jump in.
I was going to say, I think in my experience, in my opinion, just knowing myself from my day to day, I can almost get too fixated on my routine, right? So I'm like, well, I go get 2 coffees, I go do this, I do that. And sometimes I have to stop and be like, you're way too in your routine. Because when I get downtime, I don't know what the hell to do with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I have if I'm not working and engaged and energetic and you know, doing the mission and what we do and why we want to do it, I'm like, hands up. What do I do with my hands?
So is that a risk then? Too much routine? I mean,
Krista?
Too much routine, but on the flip side, how do we be still? That is something David
How do we?
has challenges
question,
with, and
Krista.
I think we all can identify with that when particular entrepreneurs who have so much going on at all times. You know, our comfort zone is the go, go, go.
yeah.
We don't know how to pause, be still. And you find what works for you. So for me, for example, I have to have a guided something to sit with. It's really hard for me to sit in a quiet space and do nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too because again, from my own experience, you know, when I was a journalist, having ADD, I don't know whether I actually clinically have it or not, but I feel ADD most of the time, was a benefit to me because there was always news happening and I always had to juggle a lot of things, or we would get put into a situation where it's like, all right, you're on the ground, something just blew up, you need to figure it out, go find people to talk to, go find a place to stay, you know, all that kind of stuff.
And problem to solve.
And no, it was great. I could really dive in, and a lot of people used to ask me like, how do you stay so calm during breaking news? And I was like, I don't know, this is where I thrive. Like, this is awesome. I can just, there's constantly something to attack. And then it became sort of a little bit of a hindrance as an entrepreneur because like you need a plan and you need to, you know, work through one thing at a time. And yes, I mean, we all have to do a million things at a time, but
sure.
And sometimes it kind of gets away from you. And I think that's where I've had to kind of slow everything down. I'm not big on writing lists and writing things down, but I've like really had to force myself to do that because otherwise things fall through the cracks.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've gotten really into that lately, just checklists and notes. And I'm kind of a completionist, you know, so I like to, okay, that's done. This is done. That's done. 2 more things to do tomorrow. They'll be done, you know, so.
Well, you know what? What finally got me there. So I'm a pilot. I fly tiny airplanes. And checklists are a huge part of flying because you can't forget stuff. Because if you do, you know, bad things happen. So that's where I kind of started to get into that routine of like, okay, I've got to get a checklist because if something's wrong, I'll notice it immediately and I can deal with it right then, rather than like, oh, you know, 6 hours ago I was supposed to, whatever. So, so David, I want to talk to you a little bit about Open Door.
Sure.
We jumped right into the meat here, which is awesome. So tell me a little bit about what you do and the work that you guys do there.
Yeah, so we basically are a business that is promoting, from a mission standpoint, a cultural change standpoint, neurodiversity is diversity, right? So the entire diversity in the workplace, you know, train is obviously rolling, and it should be. And there's DEI programs that are new now and that are coming up. And then some companies are checking boxes, others are really passionate about it. But our whole kind of mission side is neurodiversity should be a portion of that, right? Mm-hmm. Of DEI. So what we do to engage that mission with our clients is we do one-on-one career mentorship and one-on-one ratio job assimilation within live work environments to teach our clients, in essence, how to work, right? We want them to be employable prior to just getting a job.
Right.
And then that faltering and then them having to repeat the whole process. And so we do that in different capacities. One would be, you know, the one-on-one job training in a live work environment. And that can be anything from a restaurant to Lockheed Martin. So a lot of tech. We have clients that go in and get you know, hands-on practice in tech and you name it. So other portion of what we do is just kind of career mentorship. Someone on the spectrum comes in, they don't really know how to approach the whole beast of the application process, much less the interview process and everything that's involved in it nowadays, which is pretty overwhelming.
Yeah,
so
I don't think it makes sense to any of us.
It's just, I mean, don't get me started on the interview process, especially with my clients. But, you know, it's something that I see that I'm just like, wow, if certain businesses or HR departments or you name it could make just tiny tweaks, they're going to end up gaining a lot more than they could lose by implementing neurodiversity in their workplace.
No, and I heard you on another podcast. You were talking about Temple Grandin, and I
Yeah.
think she said that Huntsville wouldn't exist today without neurodiversity.
There'd be no Rocket City without a bit of autism.
Yeah, no, and that's fascinating because I definitely see, again, not a mental health professional, but I see what I would categorize as symptoms of
sure.
people on the spectrum, just being around campus here at UAH, being at the different companies that I work with here in town. What is the challenge, and maybe it's different for everybody.
Sure.
But what is the challenge for people who are neurodiverse as far as getting into typical job roles? Is it?
It is individualized, and that's, I wish there were a box that could be put in and shaken and fixed, but unfortunately there's not, and that's kind of the approach that we take. Is client to client, right? Let's see this person first, not their diagnosis, and kind of work bottom up to get them where they need to be. But in general, it's more what we're working on with them in a workplace setting for them to assimilate is the soft skill side of things. It's not come in, do your job, go home. There's a lot more to holding a job or a career than that. You have to be able to navigate the workplace and socially navigate the workplace and stay on task, not get distracted, learn how to transition from one thing to another. So those are kind of the base targets if we were going to put them in the same box as far as our clients. But we typically get two types of clients, and one being the high school graduation age, 17, 18, 19, up to 21. Parents don't see them going to a four-year college, right? Maybe they didn't do that well academically, so they want to get ahead of what's the work world like. I need somebody to kind of help me navigate that, show it to me. How does it, taste, smell, sound? Who are the people I'm going to be around? And then and work their way up the totem pole. And then the other type of client we get, they might even have a master's degree in physics, right? I like to kind of call them forever students, right?
Yeah.
Or some,
I know a few.
Some super specialized degree, and they're brilliant, but they've never even volunteered. So they're terrified to enter that realm of actually working.
Right, they're comfortable.
School's easy.
Yeah, they're comfortable in that environment. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Well, so as you transitioned from helping folks on an individual basis to creating a business out of it, how did that change the way that you set up your business? Did that change the way that you do your hiring practices and the way that you interact with people?
I think so. I mean, I love the word organic, and I think that's the way I've approached. I never had an idea to be like, I'm gonna start a business.
Right.
It just kind of happened, and there was a need, obviously, a hole there, a services cliff, whatever you want to call it. But I'm still learning. I mean, I'm just, my goal is our mission, and then, top down the operations of the business and the nitpicky stuff. But the clients are what we put 100% of our energy into.
Yeah.
And I think everything else kind of takes care of itself if you can do that and manage that. So, yeah.
Let me ask you this too, because I think, navigating the work world is challenging for all of us.
Sure.
For me, when I was in corporate America, it was a lot of, office politics, and that was what turned me off from it. A lot of, navigating egos and things like that. Do a lot of folks on the spectrum, do any of them gravitate towards entrepreneurship? Is that because you can kind of create your own environment?
That's something that I want to approach more with our clientele, because a lot of them do come to us looking for help, but they really, really, really need help. And sometimes it's harder to broaden whatever they might be kind of fixated on, or the end line of what they want to do, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the time they have a certain art style, so they're not going to fit into a cookie cutter graphic design firm to where they're like, we've got this new brochure for this boring company and we want you to do the logo.
Right.
They don't want to do that. They want to do their art style or whatever it may be. So I have encouraged some of our clients to look into that, approach entrepreneurship, see what it's about. And I'm even willing to help them. I'm like, look, I'll help you. Let's create you a little brand or whatever you need to do to just get that one small victory, right? And then you can kind of carry that on. So,
Well, and I think another challenge is the executive functioning skills,
For sure.
right? Like that's something I know you work pretty closely with your clients about, and that's relevant. You know, how do you set your schedule as an entrepreneur? You know, how do you stay on task?
Time
those
management.
are time management, and those really, like, you do a really great job, I will say, in working with folks on that. And then for yourself, you mentioned really taking an organic approach to the work you do. And from a mental health standpoint, I think that's what was beneficial for you to know exactly what you needed when you came to find support.
Sure. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that is exactly how I practice. You know, I don't really endorse the medical model of practice. I don't want to diagnose you and try to put medication your way if that's really not what you need. And that's the individualized approach also.
Absolutely.
And so there's a lot of like crossover, I think, of how we approach our client base. And that set the relationship between us, I think.
And I remember when we first spoke, or we spoke about this the other day, but Krista brought up, you just needed somebody to kind of talk to for a little bit. And that was it, right? Like, nobody really sees what I do all day and how I do it, and the clientele that I'm around and whatever it may be. So just someone being like words of affirmation, whatever. That felt really good, and I was like, okay, that's nice.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's, I think, I mean, what's cool about that is that echoes to me why we started talking about MindSpark in the program that we're doing here at I2C, because, you know, it's the same thing as being an entrepreneur, right? I mean, you know, nobody understands unless you're in it, right? And so as a mental health professional, nobody understands what you do all day long except another mental health professional. Just like with an entrepreneur, you don't get it. You don't get what raising money is like. You don't get what, you know, keeping everybody's salaries on your shoulders all day long, and the success of your company. So, I mean, I think we talked about how important that is, just to have that peer-to-peer relationship, and just to say, yeah, like we can all agree this sucks. So how do we manage that?
Well, and I think too, when there's entrepreneurship, and then there's entrepreneurship added with, this is a human services business, right? It's not a product you're trying to get out or manufacture, or shipping. Like, the stresses are, it's kind of on my shoulders in essence for this person to gain success, or get some success, and that's kind of your measurable. So that's a lot too. You know, it's you're dealing in humanity.
Right.
So
yeah, it's tough. I'm not doing the same thing that you guys are both doing, but it's tough when you don't have like a widget, and you're not gauging your success on how many widgets you sold. Right. You're gaining your success on like, our first responders using drones more effectively. And it's like, it's not a great, you know, it's hard to make that metric look as good on paper as it feels, you know, when you're actually out there doing it. So no, I totally understand that. So going back to work-life balance, we talked about having a routine and a schedule and checking in with yourself. What are some of the other things that you can do to try and get back to that work-life balance, and or check in with it? Is it even possible as an entrepreneur to have work-life balance?
Not 100%. I mean, I think you have to look at it from the perspective of, it's a constant evolving thing, and communication's really important. For example, like if you have family, you have spouse, you have coworkers, you know, it's asking about like, hey, you know, I'm feeling like I'm only able to give like 30% today. Right. Can you kind of pick up, you know, the extra 70%, you know? Right. Having that ongoing open dialogue is another way to try to find that kind of balance. You know, when I was working with David, one of the things that came up was the ability to etch out, or as we say in the therapy space, you know, set a boundary. And so that was an example for him. Was he'd come home, he wouldn't be able to close his laptop. I mean, it was ongoing communications with clients, and, you know, he was doing business when he left his office at home, and that's very relatable. And it was really about working for just encouraging some time to disconnect from that and give the permission to do that. Right. You know, what are you going to be missing if you shut that down for 15 minutes?
Right. Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that's gotten worse for everybody across the board because everybody's was working from home for 2 years. And now I think we've gotten into this rut where, you do bring work home and you can't help but bring work home. And I know that's been, challenging for me. And that's what I did was I made my office like in a room that had a door that I could close.
Yeah.
So
And lock.
Actually, there's no lock on there, but maybe that's a good idea. But it's out of, it's out of sight, out of mind. I mean, there is some degree of, I still have it on my phone and people can still call me, but, drawing those boundaries, I think is really, I agree, is really important.
And revisiting your passions and your hobbies, right? Like when we're in this space, it's all we can do. We focus on work, 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 work. David has some really cool hobbies that he enjoys doing. And
like what?
he was not like, he was not really doing any of those things. Although even his tone in session, like his tone would brighten and his voice would change.
Probably
because
talking about fishing.
Oh, okay.
well, your musical instrument and the different things that you have interest in, but those were kind of going to the wayside, right? There was
The didgeridoo.
You play the didgeridoo? That's awesome.
And I'll tell you what, for just when Krista was like, we need to focus on your breathing some, that's ground floor. I think probably what a lot of people need to. And I was like, I got a didgeridoo. Can I just play that?
I have a didgeridoo, and I tried to play it once, and my mother-in-law looked at me, and she just said, "Didgeridoo, don't."
Yeah, it's tough. It took me forever to learn how to play it, and then one night I was like, "Yeah, I got it."
Circular breathing, right?
Yeah,
Is that what? Okay,
I'm getting better. That's tough.
Okay.
But you're gardening, he loves cooking. Like
Love
he's
to cook.
very much into like cooking and gardening and fishing and I don't know, sitting around the fire out back, like you had mentioned, just like fire pit, and I mean, I don't know who doesn't think staring into a fire is not soothing.
Yeah, no,
all those things.
I was
right?
doing it yesterday, but I had my laptop.
Yeah, right. Wait a minute.
He's regressing.
Work's creeping in. Work's creeping in. Yeah, no, I feel you. And you texted me the other day and said, hey, if you want to meet at a certain time. I said, no, I'm going to be flying. I shut off my phone. I went flying. I took the kids actually and my wife. And it's like never fails when I go flying. I mean, only for an hour. So you have to stay current. So every 60 days, I've got to go up for an hour and do 3 takeoffs and landings. Mm-hmm. And at one point I was like, oh, this is a burden. And now I'm like, oh my God, I look forward to that so much because it's my happy place. So I get up, like I can't focus on anything but flying the airplane because if I do, I'll die. Yeah. It's like it forces you into
a good
this
motivator.
Yeah, especially when your entire family is in the plane. So it kind of forces you into this space where like you have no choice but to focus on what you're doing.
Right.
And it's also just fun. It's not the cheapest hobby in the world.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think I'll me and my girlfriend were talking the other night, and she was like, sometimes I wish you would put as much energy into yourself as you do your clients.
Yeah.
And she didn't say me, but she said yourself.
Yeah.
And that kind of made a lot of sense to me when she said that. And sometimes I think it's hard to flip the switch. You do have to add the routine of the joyful small hobby things, kind of like I would do with my work tasks. So I'm that's a thing I'm actively kind of working on. And
we're going to do an episode with my wife so we can ask her what that looks like, because I think it definitely takes somebody who is with you all the time to see when things are not okay.
For sure.
And to say like, hey, reality check here. Like, I know you think you got it all together, but like you're snapping at the kids or, you're not here, you're mentally checked out. So I'm interested and also frightened to hear what she has to say. I did say, she loves the fact that I'm doing this podcast. So I think I'm taking at least some steps in the right direction.
That's so needed. Yeah. It's so relevant. I mean, just to much less entrepreneurs, but anyone. Just I think in knowing that you're not thinking about this constantly alone, and
the power of being able to just tell someone and tell your story is that in itself is healing.
Yeah. Well, and I think we've talked about this in earlier episodes that you may not have heard it yet, but the idea that like as entrepreneurs, I think we're a little bit afraid to talk about it because we don't want our stakeholders or our investors to think like, oh, they can't hack it. But like whether they know it or not, every one of the founders that they've invested in is struggling.
Right.
Right. I mean, we're all dealing with this on some level. And so, I think it's something that we can normalize. I think that's something we should talk about. Obviously, there's going to be levels, right? I mean, there's going to be people who, are literally on the verge of collapse, and those probably aren't people you want to give a whole bunch of money to, or at least, double check before you do. But all of us are struggling with this on some level, and that's why I thought this was so important to normalize and to talk about. So,
I agree.
You're just elevating and providing a space for people to say, I can speak up, right? Yeah. I can say this is not easy, and how do I get support and find my people? Right. And this is a great platform to do that.
Well, and that's the other thing too, is just to say it's not easy doesn't mean I can't do it.
Right.
Or it doesn't mean it's not going well. It just means it's not easy. Right. And so, I mean, I think it's okay to say that. Like, I don't think anybody ever, my passion for fundraising and building, building decks and stuff like that. But, it's not easy to put a pitch deck together. It's not easy to get up in front of, somebody like, our only example of that in the media is Shark Tank, I mean, but it's not a whole lot less terrifying than that. And so I think it's, it's okay to say that that's hard and that there's struggle involved.
And I think when there's a passion behind it, whatever it is, and it's also in tandem your career
identity,
it's going to double your stress, your feeling inadequate, or you're not doing as much as you could be doing, or people are judging you, or XYZ.
Well, and that goes back to your whole identity is wrapped up in this, right? So if this fails, does that mean you fail?
Exactly. It's you. Yeah. You're 100%.
And look, I mean, I'm just going to say it again because I tell myself this all the time, is like, yeah, this is hard. It has nothing to do with my idea. I mean, maybe it does, but it's hard no matter what my idea was, right? I could have had the idea for Uber or Walmart or something, and it still would have been really hard. And then you add on top of that, 2 years of pandemic stress, and then, we're heading into what might be a recession, and we potentially have World War III going on.
I mean, the state of the world
going on. Yeah,
I think every human being on this earth's anxiety is almost double in the past couple of years.
Well, that just came out a couple of weeks ago, right? That, like, what was it? 90% of people have some kind of anxiety.
If you don't have anxiety, you do not have a pulse.
You're the minority. You're definitely minority there.
It's not about whether you have it; it's about how you deal with it. I think is what I'm.
And how distressing it is to you to do your regular.
Right. Yeah. And there's just information overload. Hitting our faces and our brains and our feelings and everything every single day, so much of it.
Yeah.
We're not equipped to do modern life. Like, evolution has not gotten us there yet. Yeah. And so this is where shutting down the technology, taking that space is so important.
Yeah. Well, and that's the good way to do it, right? And then there's also all these reports about, increased numbers of alcoholism and drug abuse and all kinds of stuff like that. So, a friend of mine is a hospitalist. She works in an intensive care unit, and she said the number of people coming in with drug overdoses and long-term effects of alcoholism has gone up significantly just in her anecdotal experience, because we're all dealing with this stress, and some of us are doing it better than others, and some of us are using things like drugs and alcohol, which, again, no judgment. But if that is the case, then you need some help, and you need to find a better way to manage it. So, well, I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
It's really great to have you on, and it's very cool. I think my only example in the media of a mental health professional getting help from another mental health professional is on The Sopranos. When Dr. Melfi goes in, she talks about all her crazy patients. So it's good to have another example of that. And just, again, really appreciate what you're doing, for the autism community, and you as well too. We haven't talked about you much yet, Krista, on this podcast. I think we need to do an episode with you as the guest.
Yeah,
and talk about talk about your business and some of the stuff that you're working on. So, but anyway, David, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
As always, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Big thanks to David for coming on. If you like what you heard today, please like, subscribe, and share with anybody you know who may need this resource. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please reach out to us at emotionalrunway@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.